Most of you aren't subscribed. Make sure to subscribe, as it helps out the channel. Without further ado, nonchalantly looking around the room, Yuji spots Father Stale tied up, but more importantly Johan is working for the cult. Turning to Yuji, Johan fires his spell at Yuji, but Yuji transfers a spell to his slime, erecting a barrier, following up by dispelling the bind tying up Father Stale. Happy to see Father Stale not hurt, Yuji finally looks at Walter, who is ecstatic to finally meet Yuji the emissary. Since it's almost time, Walter calls upon his undead to distract Yuji and Father Stale, retreating back into a passage with Johan. As Yuji and Father Stale fight through the horde of undeads, we cut to Walter, who shows off his cursed room, heading to a chair infused with cursed energy. With a terrified face on Johan, Walter sits on the chair, absorbing all the cursed energy, only to begin transforming, right as Yuji and Father Stale enter the room. As Walter begins morphing into a monster, Yuji shoots a fireball, attempting to kill Walter before he finishes transforming, but as the smoke clears, Walter appears, having completed his transformation. Charging at Yuji and Father Stale, Walter smashes their location, but luckily Yuji's wolf reacts fast enough, taking Yuji and Father Stale to safety. Gazing at Walter's new form, Yuji is able to deduce that Walter had infused his own body with Dragon's Grace. Right at that moment, Walter begins to sprout wings, horns and claws, gaining the ability to shoot a beam from his mouth. Sending a slime to cast a barrier around Father Stale, Yuji personally erects his own barrier, letting Walter move in close, only to have his slime sneak up from behind, shooting a fireball at Walter. Sensing a magic spell, Walter easily evades the fireball, flying high up into the air, taunting Yuji's pathetic attempt. Ordering his wolf to jump over Walter, with several slimes on its back, Yuji transfers all the slime's fire spells, bombarding Walter from above. When Walter attempts to flee, Yuji simply has other slime's fire spells at him from all directions, but as the smoke clears, Walter appears unfazed, as none of Yuji's spells have damaged Walter's thick skin. Seeing that there is no other option, Yuji tosses one of his slimes towards his wolf, casting a barrier around it, giving it enough time to spit out a set of armor for one slime and one wolf. Having the slime and his wolf equip their armor from Gaggle, Yuji casts physical and magical boosts on the two, having them chase after Walter. With his wolf blitzing around Walter, Walter is barely able to track the wolf's movements, but right when Walter spots the wolf, Yuji's slime appears, casting a fireball, but this time the spell is amplified due to its legendary tier armor and Yuji's spell boost. Landing perfectly on Walter, Walter falls out of the sky, badly injured, having lost some limbs. Spotting his undeads nearby, Walter absorbs the undead's life force, regenerating his limbs. Making his way towards Yuji, Walter is hit by another fireball, taking more damage, but Walter simply absorbs more of his undeads, healing himself. Continuously blasting Walter with fireballs, Yuji realizes that Walter is not only healing, but is also growing stronger with every undead absorbed, but realizes something. As Walter finally makes it to Yuji, Walter swings at Yuji, but Yuji, along with his wolf's help, is able to evade shooting fireballs to distract Walter. Testing out a theory, Yuji casts Dispel on Walter's body, seeing Walter's legs lose their power. Yuji confirms that since Walter's body is made from a curse, Yuji can break the curse and kill Walter. Before Yuji can cast another Dispel, Walter flies in close, prompting Yuji to erect a barrier. Allowing Walter to pummel his barrier, Yuji waits for Walter to break his barrier, only to cast a binding spell, pinning Walter to the ceiling. Following up, Yuji has 10 of his slimes cast the same binding spell, ensuring that Walter can't escape, allowing Yuji to finally cast his Dragon's Breath, blasting Walter cleanly. Checking on Walter's body, Yuji is impressed that he's barely alive, but Walter is still smiling. Walter reveals that he doesn't care if Yuji dies or if he's defeated, as now everything has been set up perfectly. Calling out to the divine beings above, Walter offers his and all of his followers life to the machine in the cave. Right on cue, the cave begins glowing as the machine that infused Walter with the dragon's essence begins absorbing all the remaining undead bodies, along with Walter's himself. With Yuji casting a barrier around him, his companions and Father Stale, they all wait for some sort of massive explosion, but instead a single speck of light is created from all this chaos, slowly floating to the ground, but upon touching the ground, a mysterious person appears, deeming themselves the sage. Asking Father Stale if he knows if this sage is Walter, Father Stale reveals the rest of the prophecy that he hadn't told Yuji, stating that the person that was meant to die to give rise to the Almighty Sage was referring to Walter, and now this mysterious person in front of Yuji is the sage from the prophecy. Father Stale states that long ago, he was called upon by the divine beings, tasked with slaying dragons that plagued the world. Sadly, the emissary had passed away, but right now, that emissary has been resurrected by Walter, having performed something similar to a spirit summoning, and is now deemed the sage. Wondering if the sage is a god, Yuji learns that he isn't, but before he can ask any more questions, the sage releases a dragon's breath, similar to Yuji's. Projecting a barrier and reacting just in time, Yuji is surprised to see that the sage's dragon breath spell is very powerful, having blown up the cave they were all in, only to fly high up into the air. Knowing that he should get a feel of the sage's capabilities, Yuji casts stamina, mobility, defense and jump boost on his wolf and several slimes, ordering them to fight the sage. As the wolf carries the slimes towards the sage, one of the slimes fires a fireball at the sage, but the sage nonchalantly erects a barrier, retaliating with a fire spell of their own. Able to dodge the sage's spell, Yuji orders all his slimes to spread out, casting platforms to help the slimes move around and confuse the sage. Next, the slimes cast multiple fireballs at the sage from all different directions, but the sage is able to react to each and every fireball, blocking the spells with his barriers at an inhuman rate. Seeing his own MP dropping rapidly, Yuji wonders how the sage is able to continuously block and cast his own spells, believing that the sage has an infinite amount of mana. Wanting to end this fight quickly, Yuji orders for all his slimes to gather above the sage, having them all cast an ice spell, trapping the sage in an ice block. When the sage easily breaks free from the ice, Yuji has his slimes follow up with a combined fire spell, able to finally knock the sage out of the air, smashing the sage into the ground. When the smoke clears, Yuji is shocked to see the sage unfazed, preparing to cast the dragon's breath spell, but multiplied by 10 times. Knowing that he can't block it, Yuji uses up a vast amount of mana, mimicking the sage's dragon breath tenfold spell, both shooting the spell simultaneously. As both fire spells collide, Yuji is able to come out on top, blasting the sage away, but Yuji's mana is now in the negative. Once again, the sage looks completely unfazed, even after being hit with such a powerful attack, but this time the sage activates what he calls salvation, having beams of light erupt from the ground, triggering other machines placed around the world, causing a cursed cloud of smoke to begin filling the air. Immediately sensing huge amounts of dragon's grace in the air, the cursed clouds begin to rain, and the creatures from every location begin to turn evil. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like and comment.